In January 1995, the Suzuki Jimny was a piece of agricultural equipment. It was a leaf-sprung, metal-dashed box designed for foresters and construction sites. It was a machine built for work, possessing a ride quality that punished anyone foolish enough to drive it on pavement. But by December of that same year, the Jimny had undergone a metamorphosis. It suddenly wore wood-grain trim. It featured inclinometers and neon-accented upholstery. It had evolved from a forestry tool into a fashion statement. 1995 stands as a fulcrum in automotive history. It was the year utility tipped toward lifestyle, creating a specific kind of lost luxury that we simply do not see anymore. It happened because of a single competitor that forced their hand. By the end of 1995, Suzuki would make a decision that would divide the Jimny community forever. To understand why a simple off-roader needed to change so drastically, we have to look at the pressure cooker of mid-90s Japan. The economic bubble of the 80s had burst, yet the desire for escape remained. The country was in the grips of what was called the RV boom, a trend that in the West usually means a motorhome, but in Japan referred to recreational vehicles. This category included SUVs, station wagons, and anything that projected an image of outdoor freedom. Urban dwellers in Tokyo and Osaka were turning away from traditional sedans. They wanted vehicles that signaled adventure. They wanted the aesthetic of the camel trophy, even if they only ever drove to the grocery store. But there was a dissonance here. These buyers wanted the rugged look of a Land Rover, but they demanded the comfort of a Toyota Corolla. They wanted the dream of the mountains without the reality of a harsh, truck-like ride. This desire collided with the strict regulations of the K-Class. The Japanese Ministry of Transport had drawn a very small box for these cars. To qualify for lower taxes, a vehicle could be no longer than 3.3 meters long, no wider than 1.4 meters, and limited to 660 cubic centimeters of displacement with 64 horsepower. Most manufacturers would look at these limits and build a cheap, disposable commuter car. But Suzuki decided to make the Jimny denser. They realized luxury could mean specification, filling that tiny footprint with better materials and complex engineering. This is where the concept of lost luxury begins. It was an era where constraints forced innovation inward. Instead of sprawling screens, value was added through mechanical density. The engineers had to figure out how to pack a turbocharger, an intercooler, air conditioning, and a durable four-wheel-to-drive system into a space smaller than a modern bathroom. But the engineering team faced a massive problem. The market demanded refinement, but Suzuki was still building on a chassis from the early 80s. They were trying to answer a modern question with an ancient answer. Suzuki's solution was so clever, so densely engineered, that it created an entire category of cars that simply does not exist anymore. In fact, some of these features are now illegal in new vehicles. But before we get there, we need to talk about what was about to be lost forever. The first 10 months of 1995 represent the final stand of the old guard. For purists, this specific era, known as the JA11, is the zenith of the classic Jimny. It was the last time the vehicle felt truly mechanical, unburdened by the need to be polite. At its heart sat the F6A engine. This was a water-cooled inline three-cylinder unit, but unlike the disposable engines of today, it used a cast iron block. That choice of material matters. Iron is heavy, it is dense, but it is incredibly resistant to heat. You could push the turbocharger hard, generating heat that would warp a modern aluminum block, and the F6A would simply keep spinning. It was a torque-rich little engine designed to lug through mud, not sprint down a highway. It produced between 58 and 64 horsepower, depending on the tune, but the numbers failed to convey the character. It was an engine you could feel working, vibrating with a sense of purpose that modern, isolated powertrains have completely filtered out. Then there was the suspension. The early 1995 models rode on semi-elliptical leaf springs at all four corners. This is technology that dates back to horse-drawn carriages. It is crude. It is stiff. On the road, a leaf sprung. Jimny is a visceral experience. Every pebble, Every crack in the asphalt is transmitted directly to your spine. It bounces, it jitters, but it is also incredibly honest. You know exactly what the wheels are doing at every moment. There is no filter between the driver and the terrain. Leaf springs offer distinct advantages for a dedicated off-roader because they naturally locate the axle without the need for complex control arms. They are simple to repair in the field, but they made the JA11 a bouncy companion on the pavement. But Suzuki knew that the recreational vehicle boom required more than just durability. They had to inject a sense of premium leisure into this tractor-like platform. This is where Suzuki introduced the Scott Limited, a collaboration with a high-end fishing rod manufacturer, a car company partnering with a fly fishing brand to sell a specific lifestyle. It featured upholstery designed to handle wet waders and storage solutions tailored for rods, proving that Suzuki viewed the Jimny as a tool for affluent hobbyists who spent thousands on their gear. The ultimate expression of this philosophy arrived in February 1995 with the Land Venture Edition. This was the JA11 going out in a blaze of glory, featuring two-tone body cladding that gave the upright box a planted look. But the real story was inside. Suzuki filled the cabin with sculpted bucket seats upholstered in high-grade cloth. The crown jewel was the multimeter, a dashboard pod containing an inclinometer, an altimeter, and a digital compass. Functionally, these gauges were superfluous for a trip to the supermarket, but that is missing the point. These gauges allowed the driver to fantasize. They were illuminated in amber or green at night, creating a cockpit atmosphere that suggested you were piloting an aircraft rather than a K car. It was about the potential for adventure. This was the specific flavor of lost luxury, adding value through complex, tactile instrumentation rather than software. It was the peak of the JA11's life in Japan. But while this chassis was being celebrated as a premium icon in its home market, its sibling was facing a slow, painful death on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. While the Jimny was enjoying a renaissance of luxury in Japan, a storm was brewing on the horizon. The most significant external factor influencing the 1995 Jimny was not a government regulation, but a rival. In 1994, Mitsubishi released the Pajero Mini. This was a direct shot across Suzuki's bow. It looked rugged, mimicking the styling of its larger Dakar-winning brother, but beneath the sheet metal, it was a completely different animal. The Jimny was built on a truck-like ladder frame with solid axles front and rear. It was stiff, heavy, and uncompromising. The Pajero Mini, however, utilized a unibody construction with a hybrid frame and independent front suspension. It offered a ride quality that was vastly superior to the leaf-sprung Jimny JA11. It drove like a normal hatchback. It handled corners without terrifying the driver. It absorbed bumps rather than transmitting them directly to the occupant's kidneys. The Pajero Mini proved that the new wave of recreational vehicle lifestyle buyers valued comfort over absolute off-road articulation. They wanted the image of the mountain climber, but they demanded the commute of a salaryman. They did not care about axle flex. They cared about not spilling their coffee on the way to work. This realization sent shockwaves through Suzuki's Iwata engineering team. They realized that their monopoly on the micro 4x4 market was over. Their ancient suspension technology, once a badge of honor, was suddenly a liability. To fully appreciate the richness of the Japanese market in 1995, one must look across the Pacific to the United States, where the Jimny's story was taking a tragic turn. The 1995 model year marked the end of the line for the Suzuki Samurai in North America. It closed a chapter that had begun with record-breaking sales in the mid-'80s. But by 1995, the American Samurai was a ghost of the machine sold in Japan. The contrast between the two markets highlights exactly what was lost. In Japan, the Land Venture Edition was being fitted with turbochargers, air conditioning, and altimeters. It was a premium object. In America, the Samurai was a pariah. The export model was powered by a naturally aspirated 1.3-liter 4-cylinder engine. It produced between 63 and 66 horsepower. It lacked the turbocharger that gave the Japanese models their low-end urgency. It felt anemic, struggling to keep up with modern highway traffic. It was a vehicle trapped in the past. The humiliation of the American model went deeper than just the engine. While Japanese buyers enjoyed premium cloth seats and wood trim, the 1995 US Samurai was stripped of its rear seats entirely. New safety regulations regarding rear shoulder belts made the old bench seat illegal. Rather than spending the money to redesign the vehicle for a dying market, Suzuki simply removed the seats. The 1995 Samurai became a strict two-seater. It was a poverty-spec relic, decontented and ignored. This stagnation was the result of a controversy that had started years earlier. In 1988, Consumer Reports rated the Samurai not acceptable, claiming it was prone to rollovers during evasive maneuvers. Suzuki vigorously disputed these claims. They argued that the testing methodology was altered specifically to induce a rollover that would not occur under normal driving conditions. Although Suzuki eventually sued and settled out of court years later, the reputational damage was irreversible. Sales plummeted. The Samurai spent its final years in America as a punchline. This disparity is why the 1995 Japanese models are now so highly sought after by American importers. Japan received a highly evolved, feature-rich micro SUV, while the US watched the honest 4x4 die a slow death. Suzuki realized that to survive the Pajero in Japan, they had to revolutionize the suspension. In November 1995, the hammer finally dropped. Responding to the existential threat posed by the comfortable Mitsubishi Pajero Mini, Suzuki executed a maneuver that would divide the Jimny community forever. They launched the JA12 and JA22 models. To the casual observer walking past a dealership in Tokyo, these new vehicles looked remarkably similar to the ones they replaced. They retained the boxy silhouette and the upright glass. But underneath the steel skin, the engineers had performed a radical surgery. This was not merely a facelift, it was a fundamental reimagining of how a small 4x4 should interact with the Earth. The most significant casualty was the suspension. For decades, the Jimny had ridden on simple leaf springs. In November 1995, Suzuki discarded them in favor of a 3-link rigid axle setup with coil springs at all 4 corners, located by leading and trailing arms with a panhard rod. The transformation in ride quality was immediate. The harsh, jarring impact of potholes was replaced by a compliant, absorbent motion. The Jimny had learned manners. It could now travel at highway speeds without vibrating the driver into a state of fatigue. However, this newfound compliance came with a heavy price. In the off-road community, this transition is still debated with religious fervor. While coil springs generally offer better articulation, allowing the wheels to drop further into ruts to maintain traction, the leaf spring setup was inherently more stable on steep side slopes because of its stiffness. The JA12 and JA22 marked the specific moment the Jimny prioritized the comfort of getting to the trail alongside the capability on the trail. It was the first step away from pure utility and toward the compromises of a passenger car. But the revolution did not stop at the springs. Suzuki made a fascinating strategic decision to split the product line based on the engine, creating 2 distinct mechanical personalities for the new chassis. This decision highlights the tension between the past and the future. On one side was the JA12, the traditionalist. It retained the legendary F6A engine from the previous generation. This meant it kept the cast iron block and the single overhead cam design. Suzuki kept this engine in production because it was a known quantity. It was reliable, it was beloved by mechanics, and crucially, it retained hydraulic power steering. This system provided the heavy communicative feedback that purists demanded. You could feel the resistance of the mud through the wheel. On the other side stood the JA22, the modernist. This model introduced the all-new K6A engine, representing the future of Suzuki engineering. This was a sophisticated unit featuring an aluminum alloy block, double overhead camshafts, and 4 valves per cylinder. It was lighter, it revved higher, and it was more fuel efficient. Perhaps most significantly for long-term ownership, It replaced the rubber timing belt with a metal timing chain. This meant owners no longer had to worry about the catastrophic belt failures that plagued older engines. Yet the JA22 also introduced a technology that would eventually sanitize the driving experience of almost every car on the road. Electric power steering arrived, and while the hydraulic system in the JA12 was chatty and organic, the electric system in the JA22 was efficient and somewhat mute. It removed the tactile feedback that told the driver exactly what the front tires were doing. The steering became lighter, easier for parking in Ginza, but vague at the center. This was the trade-off of 1995. We gained engines that were lighter and suspension that was softer, but we lost the heavy, iron-willed sensation of operating a machine. The mechanical soul was beginning to be replaced by electronic compliance. With this new, refined platform established, the marketing team was free to push the aesthetic of the RRV boom to its absolute limit, dressing this softened chassis in the wildest costumes of the decade. With the new refined platform established, the marketing team at Suzuki was free to push the recreational vehicle aesthetic to its absolute limit. If the engineering goal of late 1995 was modernization, the aesthetic goal was excess. The final weeks of that year birthed a series of trim levels that defined the concept of lost luxury. These were not merely cars with different badges, they were highly specific, factory-built expressions of a lifestyle that no longer exists in the automotive world. The flagship of this new era was the Wild Wind Edition. While the name might sound like a mistranslation to modern ears, in the context of the mid-90s, it was a declaration of intent. This model was designed to look fast, expensive, and capable even while parked in a dense Tokyo neighborhood. Externally, it departed from the utilitarian roots of the Jimny by featuring body-colored bumpers, replacing the unpainted black plastic that had defined the model for decades. It wore a dedicated roof rack and distinctive side decals with aggressive scripts. The true story of Wild Wind was inside the cabin. Suzuki equipped these tiny vehicles with genuine Momo leather steering wheels as standard equipment. This was a brand association usually reserved for Italian sports cars, yet here it was in a 64-horsepower K car. The upholstery was a riot of period-correct fashion, featuring snappy checkered square patterns with multicolored broadcloth inserts. We are talking about a palette of teal, purple, and black, the same colors you would find on a high-end North Face jacket from the same year. It was loud, it was confident, and it was undeniably premium. However, the Fishing Master variant stands as the most fascinating example of this era. Based on the new chassis, this was not a marketing gimmick. It was a factory-built tackle box on wheels. Suzuki recognized that a significant portion of their buyers were serious anglers, so they built a car specifically for them. The ceiling of Fishing Master was equipped with a factory-installed rod holder system. This was not a flimsy aftermarket add-on, but a robust rail system capable of securing valuable fishing rods safely out of the way of passengers. Recognizing that its clientele would be wading in rivers, Suzuki equipped the interior with waterproof seat covers and deep rubber tray mats designed to contain water and mud. This was pragmatic luxury at its finest, a level of factory customization that allowed a seamless transition from the river to the highway. This era also cemented the iconography that collectors still hunt for today. The Rhino mascot became ubiquitous in 1995. It appeared on spare tire covers, floor mats, and decals, symbolizing a creature that was small but tough. We also saw the rise of the Man in the Moon tire cover graphic, a surreal image that suggested the Jimny was a nocturnal creature, ready for adventures that happened while the city slept. These graphics were not just branding, they were an invitation to a specific kind of life. Yet, inside the cabin, something had been lost. The transition from the JA11 to the JA12 and 22 brought a complete overhaul of the dashboard. The flat, metal-faced dashboard of the previous generation, which harkened back to the military Jeeps of the 1940s, was gone. In its place was a fully molded plastic dashboard with rounded corners and rotary dial climate controls. It was safer. It was more ergonomic. It had better ventilation, but it was also less special. It looked like the dashboard of a sedan. The tactile connection to the machine was being smoothed over by the demands of modern comfort. This moment in 1995 represents a fork in the road for automotive history. It was the last time a manufacturer tried to make a tiny, cheap car feel expensive through mechanical specificity rather than digital integration. Today, luxury is defined by the size of the touchscreen. In 1995, luxury was defined by a factory-installed altimeter, a place to store your fishing rod, and a steering wheel made of real wood. It was a time when value was added through hardware, not software. Suzuki was building cars for people who did things, not just people who consumed content. And while the Jimny was becoming more civilized with its coil springs and plastic dash, it was arguably reaching the peak of its character, just before regulations would force it to become something else entirely. Running parallel to this high-stakes drama in the K-Class was a vehicle that often gets overlooked, yet it tells an equally important part of the story. While the engineers were fighting for every cubic centimeter within the strict dimensions of the yellow plate category, there was another version of the Jimny that was allowed to breathe. This was the JB32 Jimny Sierra. It was known as the white plate version because it carried regular passenger car registration, freeing it from the restrictive laws that governed its smaller siblings. The Sierra represented a completely different approach to the problem of lost luxury. Instead of using a tiny engine stressed to its limit with a turbocharger, the JB32 used displacement. It was powered by the G13B engine, a 1.3-liter, 16-valve unit. It produced about 85 horsepower, which might not sound like much, but the delivery was completely different. It did not have the frantic, peaky nature of the turbo engines. It offered a broader, more relaxed wave of torque. It was a civilized cruiser designed for people who wanted the look of the Jimny without the frenetic energy of the K-Class powertrain. To differentiate this more expensive model, Suzuki gave it a bulldog stance. The Sierra featured significantly wider axles and prominent plastic fender flares that extended out from the body. It looked planted and substantial, contrasting sharply with the slab-sided profile of the narrow K models. The range was dominated by the ELK Limited Edition, a model that became so successful it effectively took over the lineup. The ELK was finished in exclusive two-tone paint schemes, often pairing mercury silver with dark turquoise green, and it came with a heavy-duty roof carrier and fog lamps. It was the ultimate expression of the Jimny as a lifestyle accessory rather than a work tool. For the modern collector standing on the dock at a port today, the year 1995 presents a critical decision. It forces you to choose what kind of driver you actually are. You have to choose between JA11 and JA22. The JA11 is the choice for the purist. It is the leaf-sprung tractor that offers absolute mechanical clarity. It is uncomfortable, loud and bouncy, but it will never fail you. The JA22 is the choice for the realist. It has the coil springs that make it livable on modern roads, and it has the more modern chain-driven engine. It is the bridge between the classic era and the modern car. However, there is a dark side to all this lost luxury. The very features that made these cars feel premium in the 90s are often the things that kill them today. I am talking about rust. The 1995 Jimny has an Achilles heel, and ironically, it is hidden beneath the luxury. The fancy plastic body cladding found on the Land Venture and Wild Wind models looks rugged, but it acts as a moisture trap. It holds salt and water against the steel body for decades. Many enthusiasts have peeled back that expensive-looking plastic only to find that the wheel arches and rocker panels have completely disintegrated. The luxury that was meant to add value has effectively destroyed the machine underneath. When we look back at the 1995 Jimny, we are not just looking at a used car. We are looking at a philosophy that has largely vanished from the industrial world. This was the last time a major manufacturer tried to make a tiny, cheap car feel expensive through engineering rather than screens. Today, if a car company wants to add value to a small crossover, they add a larger infotainment display and ambient lighting. In 1995, Suzuki added turbochargers, altimeters, limited slip differentials, and dedicated fishing rod holders. They tried to make the car feel substantial. They tried to give it a soul. The 1995 Jimny proves that luxury is not about the size of the vehicle, but about the density of the engineering. It was a brief moment in time where a small car was allowed to be complex, difficult, and absolutely wonderful. The story of the 1995 Jimny is the story of a pivot. It marks the shift from mechanical honesty to modern compliance. While the new Jimny is a fantastic vehicle, the 1995 era possessed a specific mechanical soul that we will likely never see again. It proves that true luxury is about intentionality, not just scale. Subscribe for more stories of lost engineering.